ATV Financial with Codey McCurrach. They're all bunching into that third turn. It's going to be a wagon race like no other in the home stretch drive.
How wagon racing evolved is these wagons back in the old days were the cooks. They were the kitchens of the old west, right, of the camps. So they'd have their tent out the back and a stove to cook everybody breakfast and lunch and supper in the morning, right? So how it evolved is the cooks and the guys who were driving the wagon, they would actually race each other who could pack up camp first and race to the next spot where they're gonna set up camp. So it just evolved from there. These old boys, old cowboys, they'd pack up camp as quick as they can. They'd hook their horses and they'd race to the next stop. And the first one there and unpacked and set up was kind of the winner. It evolved to where we have it today. At one point in time, they were turning the barrels in the infield with a heavy cast iron stove, racing around the track. And instead of crossing the finish line to win the race, they'd actually park back at their barrels, fire up their stove, and the first outfit with smoke up their chimney actually won the race. So that's how it evolved to what we have today, a rubber stove with aluminum stove rack. So of course, when we say stove, it's not an old cast iron heavy stove anymore. One, it's for safety. Two, it's lightweight, all that stuff. All this is two rubber pails joined together with zip ties. That's all that we call the stove. It's rubber pails, so if a wagon runs over it or a horse runs over it or anything like that, if it gets left behind, it just collapses. It can't harm anything. So at the start of the race, the stove is in the wagon. The outrider comes in when the wagon parks at the barrel or is about to park at the barrel. He grabs the stove out of the stove rack. Okay? Remember, he still has a thoroughbred racehorse in one hand. He sets the stove on the ground. It's mandatory that the stove has to be on the ground or it's a penalty at the horn. So at the horn, stove is on the ground, horse is in hand. Once the horn blows, the outrider's job on the back end, or what we call the stove man, lifts the stove up and sets it in the wagon, and the wagon takes off to the barrel. He runs up with his horse again, jumps on the horse, follows the wagon all the way around. If the stove gets missed at the start of the race, it's a penalty to the wagon. If the stove is off the ground at the start of the race, it's a penalty to the wagon again. So it's that outrider's responsibility to make sure that stove stays on the ground and gets in the wagon in a timely fashion. Plus, he has to get on his horse and again, be within 150 feet at the finish line so we can win day money, I guess.